Well, hi everyone. Welcome to our next installment of our Female Founders series. I'm Rachel Allard here today with a very exciting guest. I'm here with Elizabeth Braman, who goes by Liz. She is the founder and owner of JoyHub, which we'll talk about everything they do. So welcome, Liz. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So I'm really excited to kind of get into what JoyHub does and how you got started, because you are sort of representing the technology side of real estate today, and with your experience definitely have seen and done a lot of different things. So can you kind of tell us a little bit about your origin story? How did you get to where you are today?
Absolutely. And yeah, thanks. No pressure. I'm representing all of technology, but I'm more of, and I share with people quite honestly, a business stakeholder in the tech world. I kind of act as that go-between between the real estate and the technology, and I've been doing that for a number of years now. Started my career as a technology attorney many years ago now, and started in 2000. At that time, you didn't really go in-house right away. You were, working either in a law firm or in government. And I had done a JD MBA. I was in business school at the same time as law school, and I knew I wanted to go in-house, but it was kind of a little bit of a journey to get to that. I practiced for a couple years and then started an ed tech software company with some friends of mine. I had no experience in education technology. I just knew that Blackboard had started in Washington, D.C. So that was kind of like my understanding of the market. And so I had some friends that had worked there and they wanted to start this company. And I was ready to get out of being a tech attorney. So I went in-house, which we didn't really need a full-time attorney. There was three of us. We started the company and didn't know any better. We did not raise capital. We bootstrapped it, and it was 13 years later, ended up selling it to a public company. So I was kind of fortunate in having or stumbling into that experience. I stayed for the first 2 years as an employee, doing mostly sales, which was fantastic because I otherwise wouldn't have gotten that experience to be the only non-technical person at the company. I did kind of everything from, corporate structure to marketing and all of the sales. So I would speak with the clients, find out what their wants and needs were, and learned how to do cold calling, which I had no experience with. And those 2 years of doing that were really impactful going forward. But I was a little tired of eating ramen noodles and living kind of I had law loans to pay. And a friend of mine had offered me some legal work on the side, which just so happened to be in real estate. And when I started doing that for her, I kind of fell in love with real estate. It was became my passion. And I spent the next 10 years on the capital side. So financing, debt, equity in real estate, and kind of cut my chops during right before and then during the downturn, which was an experience. But through that, I ended up getting a position at a private equity backed company, ReadyCap Commercial. And there we were kind of first to market after the downturn in lending. And so we did SBA loans and got a Freddie small balance license. So I really got great experience with different loan products, launching a new loan product to market, and hiring a remote sales team and managing them, which was also amazing experience. And then when I left there to go to Realty Mogul, that was like back into the trenches of like a true startup. We had just raised our Series A. I was employee number 6. We got almost close to 100 employees at one point, and just like scaling a tech startup. That was an incredible experience, and I really enjoyed that. And that's where I saw the opportunity that eventually kind of became JoyHub, which was that there was all of these real estate operators in the market, and they were pretty resistant to adopting technology. But when they finally did, they ended up adopting it kind of in all these different systems that created all this data in silos. And with that, had this kind of issue of a lot of redundant inputs of data, a lot of erroneous data, and that most operators couldn't really access their data to do much with it. And that was kind of our aha moment. My co-founder, Justin, and I started JoyHub with the goal of offering a business intelligence solution to apartment owners, and specifically apartment owners because a third of the United States rents their housing, and it's the number one household expense, but we know so little about the wants and needs of tenants. And it's because of this data problem that we see in the market. And so that's our kind of our mission, our passion is to solve that.
I love that. And it's funny as you're talking, I mean, I feel like there's so many applications to other data problems in the industry, right? Fragmentation is kind of something that's been around for decades. So I love that you're, solving it in a really niche way. I'd love to talk about it a little bit more, but actually going back to one thing you said, you really cut your chops during the downturn of 2008. And so I'm kind of curious if you can reflect back on the last year a little bit, and how has this pandemic and recession been different for you, and kind of what have you seen?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And, hindsight's always 2020. So, we only learn things looking backwards. But I think that this time it was not as well. It was definitely as abrupt. Like the last downturn, it was kind of shocking for those of us in commercial. We thought the residential guys were really going to get hit, but commercial, I mean, obviously totally different. It's cash flowing. Forgetting the fact that most of the tenants and companies that were kind of supporting commercial real estate were, impacted by the fact that their consumers couldn't afford to keep buying things. So yeah, everything kind of came to a head, and it was longer, or at least it felt longer. Here, we've been kind of waiting for a cycle. And the fact of the matter is that apartments are actually having some of their best performance, which it sounds crazy, but what I learned in the last recession holds true to this one, which is everyone needs a house or a home. So there's, the demand for housing doesn't really go anywhere. You have to always expect the unexpected. And I think that that's where people kind of step back and we're like, okay, how is this going to impact things? And what they saw was it was less impacted because there was kind of this wait and see mentality that corrected more. So the major cities obviously are hugely impacted. And what we didn't know before was that if a pandemic hits, people will work remotely, and they probably won't want to spend San Francisco, LA, New York rents during a time when they can't enjoy all the proximity to work. They're not going to work, and they're not enjoying the other things about living in a big city that support paying those rents. So big cities have been hugely impacted, not as much the surrounding areas. And I think the big lesson here has been how impactful data is to being proactive as opposed to reactive, and seeing what those migration patterns are. There's some tremendous data that's available just using kind of cell phone movement activities and patterns. You can actually see where people are moving and from where, so that as an apartment owner, you can actually market to the people who are moving into your market, and just some really interesting things that data is very proactive in. Many operators don't know the concentration of particular industries of employment in their buildings. Do I have a lot of people in hospitality or in healthcare? And how is that impacting their ability to make their rent payments, And is it a predictive indicator of things like collections? So all of that data that we're now looking at being able to surface and utilize for some really incredible kind of predictive analytics and to help with better outcomes and just kind of telling people how they can be proactive as opposed to reactive with those data sets. It's really exciting.
That's really exciting to me. I know I'm thinking as
Yeah.
you're talking, I'm a marketing nerd and data nerd, and I've spent the last 14
Mm-hmm.
years running ad campaigns. And so, I'm
Yeah.
super excited about this. How do you help, and kind of how have you seen, brokers respond, and, people working teams within these real estate companies? Is everyone as excited about data, or, have you even seen that shift in the last year?
I think so. I think that what the last year has showed people is that the adoption of certain technologies have accelerated like 10 years worth of acceleration in a year. So things that people previously were like, oh, yeah, unmanned site tours or, air quality meters, like things like that they didn't really think of as being impactful or adoption would be low. Now we're getting this hyper adoption. And so, people want that data to tell them what's working, what's not working, what's resonating, what's helpful, and what's my ROI on these things, because they are so new and because they are trying to determine whether or not it's worth adopting, on a scaled basis. They need the data to tell them that. And the example I'm always using is, and people really have a tough time fighting me on this one, is, Amazon not that long ago used to compete against local booksellers. And what's the difference between Amazon and a local bookseller? Like, what did they do differently? And really the biggest difference is that they collected data and used it to deliver a product that was specific and focused on their consumer, and that they met their needs exactly where they were in a way that that resonated with consumers. That's kind of our current consumer base, which is everyone, has an expectation now that's elevated, which is that they are going to get what is uniquely suited for them, as opposed to this kind of blanket approach of here's housing. Well, most people that doesn't work for them anymore, especially since housing is so expensive. It is such a huge portion of people's income. They want the exact housing that fits for them. And if they can't get it or don't get it, they'll just move somewhere else.
That's awesome. There's so much in your original story. I want to go back to sort of the bootstrapping idea and your experience with startups, because I think a lot of real estate companies have been around for hundreds of years. I mean, a lot of the big franchises, but even a lot of the independents. So I'm curious sort of what you've learned about the startup mentality, and maybe what established companies can learn from startups.
Well, it's a good question. I think that startups can learn from established companies, and established companies can learn from startups. There's definitely things that each have to offer. Startups, it's just about being agile and very proactive to market conditions. There's an expectation, or should be, with people who join startups that nothing is set in stone. This is kind of where we're carving things out of the big granite rock as we start and move along. And we just have to do it really, really quickly, because if we don't get out to market and share our value proposition and deliver on that early, then we don't have a business. So there's kind of this huge urgency in a startup that more established companies don't have that same level of urgency, because they've got more of kind of like infrastructure, and it's a little more stable because they've been doing this for a long time, which of course the counter to that is that they are also maybe a little more set in their ways, maybe a little less reactive or proactive to changing market conditions. And so the nice thing about kind of your established businesses is that they do have this kind of cadence that you can build upon and iterate on that is more thoughtful. And I think that that's something that as a startup, I'm always reminding myself, like, be thoughtful about everything you do. What is your purpose for doing it? Don't just do things because it's shiny objects. And, you know, right now, saying that you've got a COVID focused business is, you know, like, it's, in some respects, it can be very buzzy to say that your business is focused on COVID. And I wouldn't say that about our business. That's not our business model. Now, it obviously has changed things. There's impacts, there's implications, but being too much and too quick, sometimes you step back and you go, oh, you know, a year from now, that may not be the right direction. We pivoted so quickly and moved so fast that we didn't really think through kind of 6 months and 12 months down the road. So, you know, I do feel unique in having been at venture-backed, private equity-backed, and bootstrapped companies, because I think there's like such different things to learn from each one. If you can try all of them, you know, you'll figure out which one is the right one for you. But they definitely all have kind of their strengths and challenges.
That's awesome. I like how you mentioned that, yeah, it's not, there's pros and cons to everything and you can learn from it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I'm sort of curious too, because, you know, I would imagine one answer to this would be data, but sort of you've grown from, you said within a year you were up to 100 employees at one of the startups. So what are your must-haves for growth? You know, what are the things that, the accelerants that you really, that you think could help everyone, from marketing to technology to leadership styles to, you know, anything?
Yeah, I'd say heard some feedback there. The tough thing about growth and the startup phase is that sometimes you have to make bets, and so you don't always necessarily get to, just because of the sheer speed of it, you're having to test things and try things when you don't know what the outcome is going to be. And so there's a lot of kind of like building and then shifting because of that, just because of the sheer speed of things. So there's a lot more testing that needs to be done, and that's where being agile comes in handy. In terms of like what technologies we use, there's a ton. I'd say having a good CRM system is key, and having that, having your CRM connect to your whatever email server you're using, so that all your emails get tracked in your CRM. And real estate, no matter what people say, it still is it's a people business. It's important that relationships are built and fostered, and those relationships really require taking a lot of care for the relationships that you've built. So knowing when people, you know, have kids or families, that personal level of interaction, that is data, obviously. So tracking all your data in a CRM is a great way of doing it, and making it as frictionless as possible. So, you know, one of the mistakes I've seen that we've done before is trying to collect too much data. So as much as you can automate that data collection through having your email synced to your CRM, using Zapier to set up some quick automation is a fantastic way to save yourself on doing redundant tasks. Some of the things our system does kind of is Zapier-like, and that's kind of like an off-the-shelf tool that you can collect a lot of data without having to do these kind of manually redundant tasks. I've also been using an AI scheduling tool, which has been fantastic. There's tons of them out there, and some of them are free. And so being able to manage your calendar without having a lot of back and forth has been fantastic. And they also, there's all these integrations, and it's wonderful what you can get out of the box these days, and set up things where you have a meeting and it automates the email follow-up, and anything that you can do kind of like to upfront that automation process and save yourself some time, and work through the scaling of that process so that you can, a lot of webinars going on these days, information, people really like that. And so being able to follow up with folks afterwards, and being a thought leader and delivering content, all of these things are kind of good ways to help accelerate growth with technology companies. Trying to think if there's any others, but I think that's a few good ones. Trello and Slack, we use those internally, and those are two tools for internal communications and for kind of project management. So just two of the many available tools out there that we are using, because with remote teams, you really want to track the data and keep people accountable, and encourage communication in ways that are easy to do.
I love that. And I love that you mentioned that a lot of them are free because they are.
Yeah.
There are really good tools out there.
Mm-hmm.
That's great. And we can put some links in the description of this video too for anyone watching this if you're interested. So you mentioned teams. So just a couple more questions. And I want to talk a little bit about your leadership style. And also you've worked with a lot of other entrepreneurs and very successful people. So, what have you learned about in 2021? What makes a great leader?
That's great. So I think, and this is my age showing, the number one thing I've seen with the best leaders has been an ability to listen. And it's something I kind of struggle with, because like I get excited and I want to kind of engage and talk. But listening to your staff, your team, listening to your clients, listening to your investors, listening to the market. I think that the best leaders I've seen, and I've worked for some incredible leaders, when they were their strongest, they were being really great listeners and very thoughtful about taking into consideration, because that's how you get enrollment from your teams, and everyone working in the right direction, and also delivering a better product to your clients, because at the end of the day, their wants and needs are what you're trying to deliver upon, not what you think they want and need, unless you're Apple, in which case somehow they figured that out. But the having a heightened EQ, leading with compassion and empathy and being authentic is just kind of somewhat buzzwordy ways of speaking to like what I've seen as the things that are really compelling from leaders in today's workforce.
That's great. Those are great tips. You didn't show your age at all. So 2 more questions. I'm curious, what when you look at sort of people who might be starting a company today, and actually we have quite a few clients who went independent during the pandemic or decided to start their own business during this time where people said, "Are you crazy?" It sounds like you at times sort of may have gotten that same response. So what would you say to people kind of considering that now, and also women looking to start their own business, and some challenges they might face?
Absolutely. So I would say, the advice I give to anyone who's starting their own business is kind of like, be bold, be fearless. Don't be afraid to fail, because there's so much learning in the failure, and it's okay. I think we let our self-consciousness, or maybe it's only me. You are afraid that you're being judged by people, and so you kind of limit yourself, and you limit what you think you can accomplish because of that fear of failure, which I think is probably overblown. I'd say starting your own business, it kind of depends. I've been, my mantra these days has been like, start backwards. Like, where do you want to end up? And then build the company that will get you to that goal. So if you want to start a business that gives you more like life balance, then that's a great business, but you're not going to end up with a lot of staff and a lot of clients. Like that's probably going to be more of a service business where you really can control your schedule and you back into how much you need to charge per hour for whatever service you provide and test the market. But like that's a completely valid business that you say, I want to make X dollars a year and I want to have this much time available for my family. And you can create that. And it may take a while to kind of build up a book of people willing to pay for that, but that's something that you can kind of model and target. If you want to start a big scalable company that you sell for billions of dollars, start with what that would need to be at the end, how long it's going to take to get there, and then really ask yourself if you're willing to do what it takes to get to that end goal, because that company or anywhere in between the two, like it means a lot of nights and weekends, or it means getting a team that works well and complementary with you to be able to accomplish that. Because, you know, in the early days, particularly, you're trying to do a lot with very little, and the only thing you really have is your time. And so putting 110%, especially if you have raised money from investors, like their expectation is that you're going to make this happen or you're going to die trying, and you owe it to them to put in 110% effort. That's my personal opinion on the subject. Like if you're going to raise money, you really have to put everything into it. And that means asking your friends and family, like, you know me, do I have that in me? Am I able to put my work above hanging out on the weekends? Are we willing to, as a family, make that sacrifice and make some decisions around whether or not that works for you, whether you even have the ability to make those decisions? And it does mean being really, really lean in the beginning, because startups, for one, you're not getting paid a lot of money in your first early years of a startup. It is definitely not a lucrative. It's all back end, if at all. So there's risk involved in startups. You look at the numbers; they're not particularly encouraging. But it is something that if you feel strongly and you feel passionate and you're okay with the risk of failure, which is high, but if that's kind of like you can't really help yourself, then yeah, it's probably in your DNA. And it's, for me, it was like unavoidable that's what I do. And I love it. So I would encourage people to find their passion, do what they love, because then it's never a job. It's always a career, and it's something that really adds a lot of value to your life.
That's great advice. You mentioned something earlier. I just want to go back to, because you seem to have a really strong sense of self, and also have, in talking about risk taking, have made calculated risks, and some of which have, it sounds like, paid off. And so, how do you stay on top of, or kind of be mindful of the next big thing? Like, are there resources, people you love to follow, or podcasts or books, or, how do you what do you look for when you look for that next big thing and decide where to place your bets?
That's such a good question. And I definitely, I think if I had it to do all over, I would say, I wish my younger self had invested small little bits in all different things. So I'm a big believer in diversification, which is, for real estate people, I've seen so many of them create this binary risk scenario where they're like, I put all my money into a deal. And I'm like, why would you do that? Don't ever do that. Every investment I make, I'm always thinking, this is how much I'm willing to lose. It is, maybe that's the glass is half full mentality, but when you're doing really, really, really risky things, you don't have to win on every single one. You're definitely not going to, I consider myself risk averse, which is, I guess, counterintuitive, but I don't think it's risky to bet on myself, because I know what I can do and I know what I'm willing to put into things to make them work. So I wouldn't say I have it's not an ego, as much as it's, maybe ignorance, blissful ignorance of how risky things actually are. But the fact is that if you do put, and I look back and say, okay, if I had put, $1,000 into Salesforce when I was one of their, early customers, that time of, the time value of things over time, at least over that period of time has been tremendous. So, making investments, and really kind of being very as diversified as possible, because for everything that fails, there's going to be something that hopefully succeeds that offsets it. But yeah, I mean, you kind of have to look at yourself and say, what's my risk profile? If I'm a startup person, then maybe I only put money into index funds, or only keep them in bonds, or something that's completely counterintuitive to that if you want to balance out your risk, or set parameters around, if I'm a startup person, I'm willing to do this for a year, and if I am unable to get the business off the ground, then work with a business partner to kind of figure out how that might work. So yeah, I mean, there's different ways of looking at it, obviously, but I think diversification is kind of my end goal for all things.
Awesome. Well, this has been great. Liz, Braman, thank you again for joining us. For everyone who joined partway through, this is our Female Founders series. I have one last question before we say goodbye. Tell us something fun about you that we don't know, that you haven't shared yet.
Oh, fun. I love to bake. I am a big baker. So I have, and I'm not one of those bakers who just came to it during the pandemic and all of a sudden is doing sour bread. I used to bring in to the office all my baked goods, and it was fantastic because when I worked at Realty Mogul, we had a lot of engineers, and they were the best because I could have made the worst baked good and brought it in, and they were so kind and generous, and would tell me how wonderful it was. So they were a great audience for that. And that's kind of like what I've missed the most, is having people that I can share my baked goods with, because now I'm baking even more, and don't really have as good an audience for them. But
Well,
no,
I live
it's
in
fun. I enjoy it a lot.
That's awesome. I was going to say, I live in Williston, Vermont. You can ship them to me. No, I'm kidding.
I was going to say, send me your address. I would love to. And I'm a New Englander as well. I grew up in Rhode Island, and all my family is in Massachusetts under a foot of snow right now. So stay warm.
Nice. So yeah, we love it here. And yeah, snow is, I mean, it's better than the mud, right? So
yeah, that is true.
Yeah, thank you so much again for being here, Liz, and have a great one.
Thank you, Rachel. Yeah, pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me. Take care.
Bye.